In the grand catalogue of universal certainties, rivers ranked somewhere between gravity and the inevitability of bureaucratic meetings running overtime. They flowed. They eroded. They existed as permanent geographical features that civilizations built around, worshipped, and occasionally cursed when flooding season arrived with its usual disregard for property values. This was simply how the universe worked, and approximately 947 spacefaring species had structured their entire understanding of settlement planning around this fundamental truth. Rivers did not change course overnight. That would be absurd. The Velthrians, a species of amphibious scholars with skin like polished river stones and a cultural identity deeply rooted in aquatic philosophy, had perfected the art of riverside civilization over the course of 14,000 years. Their homeworld featured river networks so stable that some waterways had flowed along identical paths for 3 million years. When the Velthrians achieved space travel and began establishing colonies on suitable worlds, they brought this river-centric wisdom with them. Water sources were sacred. Riverbanks were eternal. You built your infrastructure accordingly and passed it down through generations, confident that your great-great-grandchildren would draw water from the same spot you did. The colony world of Thessin 9 had seemed perfect for this approach. A temperate planet with reliable rainfall, stable tectonics, and river systems that behaved exactly as rivers should, flowing downhill, seeking the path of least resistance, maintaining their courses with geological patience. The Velthrian settlement of Meridian Deep had been established along the Serpent's Whisper River precisely 217 years ago, and in all that time, the river had been an absolute professional about staying exactly where it belonged. Chief hydrologist Venn stood on the traditional observation platform, his webbed feet planted firmly on stone that his ancestors had laid. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone whose job security was guaranteed by the laws of physics. Below him, the Serpent's Whisper flowed with its characteristic gentle current, precisely 43 meters wide at this measuring point, exactly as it had been since the first survey team had driven their markers into the soil. Another perfect reading, Venn announced to his assistant, making a note on his datapad with satisfaction. Flow rate nominal, sediment levels optimal, water temperature within expected seasonal variance. Administrator Kellix, whose office overlooked the river from what was considered the best view in the colony, nodded approvingly. The Velthrians had built magnificently here, water temples with their bases in the shallows, agricultural systems that relied on the river's predictable flooding cycles, an entire district of craftspeople who required consistent access to specific water depths for their work. Meridian Deep wasn't just built near the river, it was woven into it, around it, because of it. This was civilization done correctly. This was the natural order of intelligent species, bending their architecture and culture to accommodate geography, because geography was permanent and civilization was merely persistent. And then the human arrived. Marcus Webb stepped off the transport shuttle with the kind of relaxed confidence that made Velthrians instinctively check if they'd forgotten something important. He was tall by human standards, with sun-weathered skin, and the peculiar human habit of smiling at situations that hadn't yet proven themselves smile-worthy. His credentials listed him as a civil engineer specializing in adaptive infrastructure, which the Velthrians had interpreted as a polite way of saying he fixed things after they broke. "Beautiful river you've got here," Marcus said, shaking Venn's hand with that slightly too firm human grip. "Really gorgeous work." Venn's inner eyelids blinked in confusion. Work? The river wasn't work. It was simply there, like atmosphere or time. "We are pleased to participate in this human Velthrian cooperative initiative," Administrator Kellix said formally, because someone had to maintain diplomatic decorum. Your species' perspective on infrastructure development will surely provide interesting insights. Oh, I'm gonna have thoughts, Marcus agreed cheerfully, already walking toward the riverbank with the stride of someone conducting a casual inspection rather than approaching something sacred. He pulled out a human datapad and some kind of scanning device, humming tunelessly. The Velthrians exchanged glances. Humans had been in Galactic Council space for only 60 years, but they'd already developed a reputation. Not for being warlike, they were actually annoyingly diplomatic. Not for being stupid, their mathematics and engineering were frustratingly sound. No, humans were known for being weird in very specific ways that made sense only in retrospect, usually after they'd solved a problem everyone else had considered unsolvable or, more annoyingly, hadn't realized was a problem at all. The river makes some interesting suggestions, Marcus said after a few minutes of scanning. Ven's head tilted. Suggestions? Yeah, about where it would rather be. Marcus pointed upstream, then traced an invisible line with his finger that curved away from the current riverbank. See, you've got some geological instability about 2 kilometers up. Sedimentary layers that are eroding faster than they're replenishing. During heavy rain events, the water volume increases, flow velocity goes up, and eventually, he made a whistling sound and a gesture that apparently meant something catastrophic in human body language. Eventually what? Kelix asked, with the tone of someone humoring a child's imagination. Eventually the river says, screw this, and cuts a new channel. Marcus said it like he was discussing weather patterns, not apocalyptic geographical transformation. Probably during the next big rainy season. I'd give it 3 to 5 weeks. The silence that followed was the kind that civilizations create when someone has just suggested that the sky might decide to relocate. Rivers, Ven said slowly, do not change course in weeks. That is a process that takes centuries. Millennia. Oh sure, usually. Marcus nodded agreeably. But you've got a perfect storm of factors here. Soil composition, rainfall patterns that bend upstream where the water's been gradually undermining the bank for probably the last 50 years. He showed them his datapad, covered in readouts and models that meant nothing to the Velthrians. It's all right there in the math. Beautiful, really. The river's been planning this move for decades, just waiting for the right conditions. Administrator Kelix felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest, the distant cousin of panic filtered through 2 centuries of architectural confidence. That is not possible. It's super possible, Marcus said. In fact, I'd say it's inevitable. Which is why, he turned and pointed to an area of elevated ground about 300 meters east of the current river. A plot of land considered useless for anything except grazing animals. I'm going to set up operations over there. That's where the new channel's going to cut through. The Velthrians stared at him, then at the empty land, then back at him. You intend to build infrastructure, Ven said carefully, in a location where there is no water. Not yet, Marcus corrected cheerfully. But there will be. And I'd rather have my equipment already in place when it arrives. You know, avoid the rush. This was the moment when the Velthrians should have politely declined the humans' participation in their colony. Should have sent him back to whatever chaos-adapted world had produced this clearly unstable individual. Should have filed a report with the Galactic Council about humans making wild predictions based on theoretical mathematics rather than observable reality. Instead, Administrator Kelix found herself saying, "We will observe your methods with interest." Because despite the absurdity, Despite every instinct screaming that humans didn't understand how geology worked, there was something in Marcus's voice. Not arrogance, not madness, just absolute casual certainty, like he was describing something he'd already seen happen 100 times before. The next morning, human construction equipment began arriving. Velthrians gathered to watch with the fascinated horror of anthropologists observing a species with no survival instincts. Heavy machinery rumbled across the empty eastern ground. Humans in bright orange safety vests marked off perimeters and drove foundation stakes into soil that had never seen a river and, by all reasonable expectations, never would. They worked with the efficient chaos that characterized human labor, lots of shouting, competing music coming from different portable speakers, and an alarming amount of coffee consumption. "What are they building?" Ven asked, unable to look away. Marcus, directing operations with a handheld radio, grinned. "Pump station, water treatment facility, foundation pads for temporary housing. You know the basics. For a river that does not exist in that location." "Yet," Marcus corrected. "Doesn't exist there yet. But when it does, we'll be ready." I also took the liberty of designing some elevated platforms that match Velthrian architectural preferences. Figured you'd want to relocate some of your lower district infrastructure once the current riverbank becomes, not the riverbank anymore. The presumption should have been offensive, would have been offensive, if Marcus hadn't said it with such genuine helpfulness, like he was offering to help carry groceries, rather than suggesting the complete geographical reorganization of a 200-year-old settlement. "This is madness," Kelix muttered, but she didn't order the humans to stop. Partly because diplomatic incidents were tedious to file, mostly because a small treacherous part of her mind was doing calculations and risk assessments and coming to uncomfortable conclusions. A human crew chief, a woman named Rodriguez with more attitude than fear, overheard her. Nah, madness would be waiting for the river to move and then panicking. This is just aggressive preparation. Marcus is always 3 disasters ahead of everyone else. It's exhausting. How can he possibly know the river will move? Ven demanded. Rodriguez shrugged while operating a crane like she was conducting an orchestra. Same way we know where hurricanes are gonna hit, where earthquakes are gonna crack, where coastlines are gonna erode. We model it. Study the patterns. Rivers aren't random, they're just patient. You watch them long enough, you see what they're planning. You make it sound like the river has intentions. Everything in nature has intentions, Rodriguez said. Physics has intentions. Chemistry has intentions. They're all trying to reach equilibrium in the laziest way possible. Rivers want to flow downhill with minimum effort. Marcus just figures out which path requires the least effort, and boom, there's your future river. She made it sound so simple, so obvious. The Velthrians, who had spent 14,000 years respecting the permanence of waterways, felt their worldview developing stress fractures. Over the next 2 weeks, the human operation expanded. They'd brought in a full construction team, 16 humans, who apparently thought nothing of building infrastructure in areas that logic insisted would remain dry forever. They worked 12-hour shifts, which Velthrians considered excessive until they realized humans viewed work and entertainment as somehow the same activity. "You're enjoying this," Ven accused Marcus one afternoon, watching him review geological surveys with visible excitement. "I mean, yeah." Marcus looked genuinely confused by the question. "Rivers are cool. Watching them do what they're gonna do is like watching a really slow-motion explosion. All that power, all that inevitability, and everyone just standing around thinking things are stable because they haven't moved in a few decades." He laughed. "Nature's got patience. Humans just learn to have more. Your species builds settlements in locations likely to be destroyed. Oh, constantly. We've built cities on fault lines, in flood zones, below sea level, on volcanic slopes, in tornado corridors, in hurricane paths, in blizzard country, in desert wastelands. Marcus counted on his fingers. Basically, if a location has a creative way to kill you, humans will build a major metropolitan area there and act surprised when nature eventually does its thing. That seems strategically unsound. Yeah, probably. But here's the thing, we got really good at prediction. You build enough cities in stupid places, you start recognizing the warning signs, storm patterns, seismic activity, erosion rates. We don't fight nature anymore. That's expensive, and nature always wins eventually. He gestured at his construction site. We figure out what nature's gonna do and make sure we're standing somewhere else when it happens. Or we're prepared with the right infrastructure when it arrives. You negotiate with rivers. Through civil engineering, sure, river wants to go east. We don't build a wall and tell it no. We accept that it's going east and make sure we've got water management in place when it gets there. It's like, Marcus searched for the right metaphor. It's like if someone bigger than you wants to walk through a door. You can stand in their way and get trampled, or you can step aside and maybe put up a sign showing them the best route. Venn found this philosophy deeply disturbing and unfortunately compelling. And if you're wrong, if the river does not move, Marcus shrugged. Then I've built some really nice infrastructure in a location with good drainage, and we look silly for a while. But if I'm right, which I am, then you've got a settlement that doesn't need emergency evacuation or complete reconstruction. You've got continuity. Preparation beats reaction every single time. This is not how civilized species approach geography. Maybe that's the problem, Marcus said with that infuriating human grin. The rainy season arrived on schedule 3 weeks later. Thesson 9's weather patterns were reliable. One of the reasons the Velthrians had chosen this world. Afternoon storms, regular precipitation, nothing dramatic. The Serpent's Whisper River rose predictably, flooding the designated floodplains that had been flooded in exactly the same way for 217 years. Then the storms got heavier. Not catastrophically, not world-endingly, just persistently, consistently heavier than the historical average. The kind of weather that made you check the forecast and think, that's unusual, without triggering emergency protocols. Venn checked his instruments compulsively. The river was rising faster than normal, flow velocity increasing, sediment levels climbing, and upstream where Marcus had pointed to his geological instability, something was happening that instruments confirmed but instinct rejected. The river bank was eroding. Rapidly. It's still just rainfall, Administrator Kellix insisted, watching the weather reports with growing unease. Heavy rainfall, yes, but natural, expected. This happens. Not like this, Venn said quietly. He'd pulled up historical data going back to the colony's founding. We've never had sustained precipitation at this level during peak flow season. The volume increases. The alarm went off at 3 a.m. local time. Every monitoring station along the Serpent's Whisper River began screaming warnings simultaneously. Flow rate critical, channel integrity compromised, erosion cascade detected. Marcus's radio crackled to life with Rodriguez's voice. "Boss, you awake? Because I think your river just made a decision." The Velthrians mobilized their entire administrative staff, rushing to observation points in the darkness and rain. They arrived just in time to watch 217 years of geological certainty commit suicide. The Serpent's Whisper River, with all the patient inevitability of water that had been planning this move for decades, found the path of least resistance and cut a new channel. It didn't happen like a disaster in entertainment media, no explosion, no dramatic rupture. It happened like everything in nature happens, gradually, then suddenly, then completely. The water found the weakness Marcus had identified. It exploited the erosion patterns he'd modeled. It followed the topography he'd predicted. And over the course of 6 hours, while the rain hammered down and Velthrians watched in numb shock, the river relocated itself 300 meters east. By dawn, the Serpent's Whisper River flowed through its new channel, as if it had always been there, as if the old course had been temporary, as if geography was always optional. The former riverbank, home to water temples, agricultural systems, an entire district of craftspeople, was now just wet land, gradually beginning to drain. And 300 meters east, where Marcus Webb had built his absurd infrastructure on useless ground, human-made water pumps were already humming to life, drawing from the new river channel with perfect positioning. Coffee, Marcus offered, appearing next to Administrator Kelix with 2 steaming cups and a completely unacceptable absence of surprise. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't even particularly smug. He just looked satisfied, in the way of someone who'd watched a predicted natural event play out exactly on schedule. Kelix took the coffee with numb fingers. Below them, human construction lights illuminated platforms and pump stations that now sat precisely where they needed to be. Emergency housing foundations that were suddenly perfectly located. Water treatment facilities positioned as if someone had known exactly where the river would go, because someone had. "You really knew," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." Marcus sipped his coffee. "Rivers are consistent. They follow rules. You just have to read what they're telling you. We've been reading this river for 200 years. You've been reading what it was," Marcus corrected gently. "Not what it was becoming. There's a difference. Rivers are always becoming something else. It just usually takes longer than a civilization's attention span." Ven appeared, looking like someone whose life's work had just filed for relocation. "Our entire settlement is gonna be fine," Marcus interrupted. "Look, I know this is scary. Change is terrifying, especially change you didn't choose. But your buildings are still there. Your people are safe. You just need to relocate some infrastructure." And he gestured at the human construction. "We've already got the foundations ready for temporary housing and essential services. Figured you'd need them. You built accommodations for us." "Well, yeah, I wasn't gonna predict a disaster and then not help deal with it. That'd be a dick move." Marcus pulled out his datapad. "I've got plans for relocating your water temple foundations. The architecture's too beautiful to abandon. We can move the whole structure if you want, or rebuild with the same design at the new water line. Your choice. The agricultural systems need redesigning anyway. I've got some ideas about terracing that'll work better with the new flow patterns. And that craftspeople district. Actually easier to service in the new location. Better water depth consistency." He was talking about the complete reorganization of a settlement like it was a renovation project. And the truly disturbing part was that he had detailed plans for all of it. "You prepared for this," Kelix said slowly. "Not just the river moving, but us needing to move. That's the job," Marcus said simply. "Engineers don't just build things. We build things that work for the people using them, under the conditions that will actually exist, not the conditions we wish existed." He smiled. The river was gonna move no matter what. I just made sure nobody had to panic when it did. Over the next month, Meridian Deep relocated. It wasn't a disaster. It wasn't even particularly traumatic, which somehow made it more surreal. Human construction crews worked alongside Velthrian builders, following plans that Marcus had apparently been developing since his second day on Thesson 9. The water temple was moved stone by stone to a new foundation that positioned it perfectly with the new river flow, arguably better than the original location. Agricultural systems were rebuilt with improvements that actually increased efficiency. The craftspeople district discovered that Marcus had been absolutely right about the water depth consistency. It was, Ven had to admit, all rather well thought out. "I don't understand your species," he told Marcus one afternoon, watching humans and Velthrians work together on the new settlement layout. "That's fair. We don't understand us most of the time either. You saw a problem no one else recognized. Predicted a disaster no one else believed. Built solutions before anyone asked." Why? Marcus considered the question seriously. Because the river was gonna move whether we prepared or not. And I've watched too many communities get destroyed by predictable disasters that nobody prepared for. Hurricanes that hit the same coastlines every decade. Earthquakes on documented fault lines. Floods in designated flood zones. He shook his head. At some point humans realized that calling something a natural disaster was just an excuse for not paying attention. Nature isn't disaster, it's just nature. The disaster is when we build like nothing's gonna change, and then act shocked when it does. So humans simply move first. We try. Marcus grinned. We fight wars over stupid things, and disagree about basically everything, but we've gotten pretty good at looking at nature and going, okay, what's your plan? And then making sure we're not standing in the way when nature executes that plan. It's not control, it's not surrender. It's just, he searched for the word, strategic coexistence. You negotiate with physics. Through civil engineering, Marcus agreed. And occasionally explosives, but usually engineering. Administrator Kelix approached with a datapad, looking torn between gratitude and professional irritation. The council has approved the new settlement plans. They're impressed with the efficiency of the transition. Glad I could help. They also want to know if you can survey other Velthrian colony worlds. Apparently we have 17 settlements along rivers that may now be considered geologically optimistic. Marcus laughed. Sure, I love a good geological survey. Fair warning though, I'm probably gonna tell you to move a bunch of them. We're beginning to accept that as inevitable. Kelix paused. Your species is very strange. Yeah, we get that a lot. You don't wait for problems. You don't ignore them. You just relocate around them. Pretty much, Marcus said. Look, every species in the galaxy figured out space travel. That's impressive. But humans figured out space travel while living on a planet that actively tries to kill us with weather, geology and wildlife. We learned to predict and adapt, or we didn't survive. So now we've got entire branches of science dedicated to looking at stable things and asking when is this gonna stop being stable. And then you move your camps before it does. And plant stakes, Marcus added, and laugh at the current. Because what else are you gonna do? Can't stop the river. Might as well make sure you're standing somewhere dry when it changes direction. 6 months later, the Velthrian settlement of Meridian Deep was thriving in its new configuration. The Serpent's Whisper River flowed through its channel like it had always been there, which technically it now had been for a quarter of a year, ancient history by human standards. Administrator Kelix approached with a datapad, looking torn between gratitude and professional irritation. The council has approved the new settlement plans. They're impressed with the efficiency of the transition. Glad I could help. They also want to know if you can survey other Velthrian colony worlds. Apparently we have 17 settlements along rivers that may now be considered geologically optimistic. Marcus laughed. Sure, I love a good geological survey. Fair warning though, I'm probably gonna tell you to move a bunch of them. We're beginning to accept that as inevitable. Kelix paused. Your species is very strange. Yeah, we get that a lot. You don't wait for problems. You don't ignore them. You just relocate around them. Pretty much, Marcus said. Look, every species in the galaxy figured out space travel. That's impressive. But humans figured out space travel while living on a planet that actively tries to kill us with weather, geology and wildlife. We learned to predict and adapt, or we didn't survive. So now we've got entire branches of science dedicated to looking at stable things and asking when is this gonna stop being stable. And then you move your camps before it does. And plant stakes, Marcus added, and laugh at the current. Because what else are you gonna do? Can't stop the river. Might as well make sure you're standing somewhere dry when it changes direction. 6 months later, the Velthrian settlement of Meridian Deep was thriving in its new configuration. The Serpent's Whisper River flowed through its channel like it had always been there, which technically it now had been for a quarter of a year, ancient history by human standards. Ven stood on the new observation platform built by humans who'd insisted on safety railings even though Velthrians could swim, and made his daily measurements. Flow rate optimal, sediment levels stable, water temperature seasonal normal. Another perfect reading, he said, but this time with the awareness that perfect was temporary and stable was just nature planning its next move on a timescale that required patience to observe. Marcus appeared beside him because humans had this unsettling habit of showing up whenever you were having philosophically uncomfortable thoughts. "River's looking good," the engineer said. "For now." "Hey, for now is all anything gets." Marcus grinned. "Besides, this channel's good for at least 300 years. I ran the models. And then it'll probably shift south about half a kilometer. But that's a problem for your great-great-grandchildren, and by then they'll have learned to just move camp when the math says to move camp." Ven's chromatophores flickered with what might have been amusement. "You've corrupted our entire approach to settlement planning. I prefer enhanced with aggressive pragmatism." In the months following the Serpent's Whisper incident, something shifted in Galactic Council attitudes toward human engineering. It wasn't respect exactly. Humans were still weird, and their methods remained uncomfortably casual about what other species considered permanent. But there was a growing recognition that maybe possibly humans had figured something out that the rest of the galaxy had missed. Other species built civilizations around geography. Humans built civilizations that could pack up and relocate when geography announced new plans. Other species viewed nature as either enemy or temple. Humans viewed nature as a roommate with boundary issues, powerful, inevitable, but ultimately predictable if you paid attention. Other species waited for disasters and then called them disasters. Humans looked at the same events, saw patterns, and called them scheduled maintenance. The truly disturbing realization spreading through galactic civilization was that this approach worked frighteningly well. Humans didn't have fewer natural disasters than anyone else. Their home planet was a nightmare of tectonics, weather systems, and wildlife that viewed humans as snacks. They just stopped being surprised by them. They built like everything was temporary and planned like change was the only constant. They moved camp. They planted stakes. And when the rivers changed course, which rivers inevitably did, given enough time, humans were already there with their coffee and their construction equipment, and their absolutely unacceptable level of "I told you so" energy. Marcus Webb eventually left Thessin 9 to survey other worlds, spreading his philosophy of aggressive, pragmatic preparation like a particularly helpful infection. The Velthrians of Meridian Deep watched him go with mixed emotions, relief that they wouldn't have to rebuild anything else for a while, and anxiety about what might change next without him there to predict it. But they'd learned the lesson. They'd seen what happened when you assumed stability meant permanence, and they'd discovered that sometimes the smartest thing a civilization could do was build like it expected to move. Because rivers changed course. Mountains eroded, coastlines shifted, and the universe didn't care about your 200-year-old infrastructure plans. The only question was whether you'd be ready when change arrived, or whether you'd still be standing in the old riverbed, insisting that water couldn't possibly go anywhere else, even as the current dried up around your feet. Humans had answered that question millennia ago, back when their ancestors had watched rivers flood and learned to build on high ground. They'd simply extrapolated that lesson to an absurd extreme, predicting not just where water was but where it would be, not just adapting to nature but anticipating its next move. And in a galaxy of species that built monuments to permanence, humans remained the only civilization that brought moving boxes to the monument unveiling, just in case the ground decided to have other plans. The river changed course overnight. The human had moved camp 3 weeks earlier, planted stakes where everyone said nothing would ever be, and laughed at people who thought current and future were the same thing. That was the lesson Meridian Deep learned. That was the lesson spreading slowly through Galactic Council chambers, one impossible prediction at a time. Nature was powerful, nature was inevitable. But nature was also patient, consistent, and ultimately predictable if you watched it long enough to see what it was becoming, rather than what it had been. Humans just happened to be the species that looked at geological timescales and said, "Yeah, but what's happening next month though?" and then built accordingly. Aggressive pragmatism, strategic coexistence, civil engineering as conversation with physics. Or, as Marcus had put it, while packing up his equipment and preparing to tell 17 other Velthrian colonies that they'd built in geologically optimistic locations, rivers are gonna river, might as well make sure you're not standing in the way when they do. The galaxy was still processing that wisdom, still trying to reconcile the idea that the correct response to permanence was preparation for change, still struggling with the concept that the smartest species wasn't the one that built the strongest walls, but the one that knew when to pack up and relocate before the walls became necessary. Humans didn't fight nature, didn't worship it, didn't ignore it. They just read its intentions, made some calculations, moved their stuff, and waited for everyone else to catch up. The river changed course overnight, exactly as predicted, precisely on schedule, and the humans were already there, coffee in hand, watching the water arrive, like they'd sent it an invitation, because that's what humans did. They looked at the universe's immovable objects and irresistible forces, did some math, and relocated to wherever those forces were going next. And then they laughed, not at nature, but at the idea that anyone had ever thought they could stand still while the universe kept moving.